We are now recording, and so a warm greeting to everyone. And as you know, I'm Seth Freeman, and tonight we're looking at the question of negotiating recession, simple keys to better results in tough times. And you should know at the start of our 90 minutes together that I love to teach. I especially love our subject this evening, negotiation. And my heart is really with everyone who's grappling with the economic effects of the pandemic. And so my deep hope is that this session together will be immediately and lastingly valuable for you. And so I want to warmly welcome you wherever you are, both in the business world, wherever you are, with your health, wherever you are, with your sense of your ability to negotiate. My hope is that this will be fun, engaging, interactive, and that you'll be able to put it to use immediately. Just as yeah, I think that should be sufficient for now. Let me start it off right away with a little video clip from somebody I have the privilege of knowing, and it's this gentleman. His name is Bob Reese, and Bob Reese is a kind of a legendary business person. He's been he's the founder of companies that have been profiled by the Wall Street Journal and Harvard Business School. Indeed, Harvard thinks enough of him that they actually have an interview of him in their entrepreneurship library. And I'm going to draw from that right now to share a story of the time when he was in trouble. And as you watch this 6-minute interview, with renowned entrepreneur Bob Reese, don't worry about getting every business term. Instead, listen for the personal qualities that he demonstrated and the kinds of action he took. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing this. Whoops. Stop share. I'm going to go to this. Oh, there we go. There we go.
They don't guarantee the sale of their products. When I was running the Paragon Needlecraft division, I was really faced with a crisis situation. We were a public company, American Stock Exchange at the time. The company's business was dropping off sharply because women were going into the workplace and not buying the needlecraft product anymore. And they had kept a lot of money in Puerto Rico, tax-free, and when they brought it back up, they lost their bank lines just as we were moving into a new place. So we were in a tremendous cash crunch, and we needed cash for the game division, which was growing. And there were rumors about it, so we were having trouble keeping up with our bills. And it didn't look good. And I decided that the best thing to do at that time was to talk to a bankruptcy attorney. Tell me the pros and cons, if it comes to it. How do I do it quickly, get out of it? Give me, I didn't know anything about it. The chairman of the company was aghast at the suggestion I would do that. And we had this big battle going internally. I said, we have to do something. I mean, we can't just sit here. I don't see a plan where we can turn it around this quick before we're going to be on bank. We're almost in a bankrupt position right now. We can't pay our bills. We can't. What do you think? We're going to keep stalling people forever? It won't work. And both divisions did a lot of business in the mail order business where you got to make your decisions. The customer must make the decisions well in advance. So we can't hang these people up. So he wouldn't agree to it. And I said, my deal when I took over the New York division, I'm running it. You can't tell me what to do. I mean, major issues. This was a major issue kind of. So I did it. I said, hey, I have an appointment with a bankruptcy attorney next week at this time in my office. You want to attend? Fine. If you don't, I'll summarize it and tell you. We're not going to do anything. I just want to know my options, how it works. So he obviously came. And I remember the guy described, if we went bankrupt then, we would be the Cadillac of bankruptcies. It would be easy. It was the right time to do it. None of us wanted to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I wanted to know if I did, how do I go about it? What would it cost? It's expensive to go bankrupt because the lawyers want the money up front. So the only way I could figure to get out of the situation, I had to go public with the thing and tell people, our big customers, I got problems. I have financial problems. That was my solution to the thing. And he went nuts over that. And so I did it anyway. I went against him. I'm sure that hurt me later. And I learned more lessons by doing it. Like we had the Disney license for needlecraft. It was our biggest license. And in that days is different. They didn't have big staffs. Disney had a guy named Pete Smith that ran all the licensing in New York. Very nice guy. I called Pete for lunch. I said, Pete, I'm in trouble. And all the contracts are boilerplate in licensing. If a company goes bankrupt, they can take the license away. And everybody, all our competitors wanted that license for years. And they were trying to, they went to this guy, Pete, and they said, listen, whatever they're paying, we'll double the guarantee. And he wouldn't do it. He was a loyal guy. So I went to him and said, I'm in trouble. And he says, well, I've heard about it. And I'm glad you called me and sitting down and talk. I said, here's my deal. You go back to your office, you'll find I owe you no royalties. You're important. You're the key to my survival. I mean, I can't play games with you. I says, if I go bankrupt, I'm not saying I'm going to try. There ain't can to avoid it. If I do, I want your word that you won't exercise the clause and take the license away. He says, you got it. Because he came forward. And then I went to some of our biggest suppliers. I went to JCPenney. I had 25 games in the Christmas catalog. Now we're talking, he's making his decision in March for Christmas. Now he puts in the catalog, and I don't deliver 25 items. He'll lose his job, his boss will lose his job, all kind of problems. I told him, I got financial problems, but I got a solution, and I need you to go along with me. And we had a good relationship for a lot of years. And I said, here's the deal. I said, a lot of these games are basic. You know what you need. You know your needs. What I want from you, here's your cooperation. I want you to give me all the, whatever you think your needs are, I want you to give me the orders early. I want you to take as early a delivery as you can, because they have some leeway. I mean, he's not going to take the Christmas goods in May, but he can take it in July. They usually take it in the first round. And as much as the Christmas projections as possible, as early as possible. And as soon as I send you the bill, pay me. That's all I want for you. In return, if we do have to declare bankruptcy, based on your projection, the chairman of our board will put up that amount of money in escrow for a letter of credit to buy these amount of goods outside of that, so you won't get caught. That was the plan. So the buyer was like, he says, it's not up to me. I don't know how to handle this one. Nobody ever did this. And so he says, I have to bring someone into the meeting. I said, fine, I'll come back. He brought in the vice president of finance of JCPenney. I told the guy the story, told the guy the plan. Guy gets up, he says, tells the buyer, from my point of view, whatever you want to do is okay. You should make a decision based on the merchandise. His plan is fine for me. And I did this with every major account, and everybody stepped forward, gave me big orders up front, paid me up front, and we never had to do the bankruptcy. So I probably learned more from that than anything, and how important the relationships are long term. You got to lay it on the table that you're in trouble, because they're going to find out. You can't keep it a secret in the marketplace. You can't pay your bills. Everybody knows it. It spreads like wildfire when you don't pay bills, because there's a tremendous underground among suppliers. We talk to each other. People don't think that's true, but they do. I've been on both sides.
Okay, so back to the slides. So what I'd like you to notice here is not the details, but the qualities that Bob showed. And there are basically four things I'd like you to take note of here. Bob was honest, he was prepared, he was proactive, and he was creative. And when we hear about negotiation, we usually think the opposite. We usually think that a good negotiator is sharp, savvy, plays it close to the vest, thinks quickly on his feet, talks a good game, you know, New York, fast talk and all that, kind of shoots from the hip, just kind of, you know, in your face, this is the deal, take it or leave it. And that's exactly right if your goal is to entertain people. But it's exactly the opposite of what real and wise negotiating looks like. And Bob's approach would not make it on nighttime television, but it actually saved the business. And those are qualities that I know you already have. And much of what we're going to be doing is developing your ability to do things you already do well. So please don't think this is one of those sessions where, you know, the professor or whoever the trainer is knows everything and you don't know anything. No. You've been doing this for a lifetime. You have great integrity. You know what it's like to prepare. When you're in school, you learn to do that. You're doing it in your business life. And we're just going to cultivate those qualities and add to them so that you can be every bit as effective and more, even in a crisis. So the nice thing about this is that negotiation can help you make things better, whether it's with a landlord, with a supplier, with a customer, with your cash flow, wherever you are. There's all kinds of evidence that this is a crucial skill for getting through, and not just getting through, getting to a place of thriving and prosperity. And I'm going to invite you to think in those terms. But what if you really don't like to negotiate? Well, I want to particularly welcome you because it turns out negotiation is something most people don't like, and I can prove it because for 2,000 years, we've felt that way. Here's the evidence for it. The word itself, negotiate, comes from two Latin words, neg otium. And what does that mean? Not leisure. Literally, you're about to have a training on something that's not leisure, but I hope you'll find that that's good news because it means that if you don't love this stuff, welcome. Most people feel that way. And I don't get up out of bed every morning and go, boy, another chance to negotiate. No. Indeed, I might even suggest that maybe the word itself is a bit of a bummer for us. You might want to think of this as talking with people or working together with people, having a conversation and doing it in a constructive way. And when you learn to cultivate that ability, call it what you will, things get better. But if you don't enjoy it, don't worry. That's perfectly okay. And it's doubly okay because this is very definitely a learnable skill. Whatever level you are, the things that we're going to look at today can actually make it more enjoyable, more successful for you. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And with that, let me go right into the meat of the matter. There are basically just two kinds of negotiating. The one that you probably think of, that most people think of when we hear the word, is competitive negotiating. You know, the more I get, the less you get, win-lose, hard bargaining, and so on. Small wonder most people don't love it because it has a kind of a contentious thing going on. It can have ethical problems. There's a feeling of aggressiveness. You feel like, you know, the other guy's taking advantage of you, or the other one feels like you're taking advantage of them. And it can just, you know, it's there. You kind of have to deal with it, but that's kind of the, you know, most people don't like competitive negotiating, and it's such a thing that people don't like it that the, the, the foundation book in my field is a book called Getting to Yes. You may have even heard of it. It's by these three professors. It's a big bestseller. They don't even talk about competitive negotiating. And here's the thing. If you don't know how to competitively negotiate and you're dealing with somebody who does, you can wind up as roadkill. And I don't want that for you. So we do need to know a little about how to do that. And so we'll actually cover that. But if the only thing you know is how to do the rough and tumble, yeah, that can backfire too, because it turns out that often misses real opportunities. You know, this morning you woke up to news reports about places around the world that are riven with conflict that's gone on for decades because people kept taking the view, the only way I can be happy is if you're not. Fight, fight, fight. And you know what that's like. This is what argument looks like. I know, I'm a lawyer. And I know, you know, it's got to have more. No, you got to have less. Fight, fight, fight. Is there another way? And the answer is, yeah, there is. And the other way is something called collaborative negotiation. It has other names, if you like, but let's stay with this one, collaborative negotiation. And it's something I'm really psyched to share with you. But first, let me just give you a quick taste of coming attractions so you can see what our time together is going to look like. As I said, we're going to be looking first at this thing about how do you negotiate collaboratively. And we're going to use a very interactive way, once I've shared a little about it, for you to practice it. So within 50 minutes, you know, 15 of me talking, 35 of you doing stuff, you're going to have this muscle strengthened. You're going to actually be able to collaborate with anyone you want to more effectively even than you may already be able to. I'm going to add some things to the mix there. Then, as I was suggesting, we'll look at how do you negotiate competitively, because we need that. It's kind of a vitamin supplement for us. We'll even figure out how to put these two seeming opposites together in a fairly short order. So that'll just take about 20 minutes, and I'll have break time in between as you'll need. And then we'll just wrap up, and I'll look at how do you negotiate with emotions and Godzilla, because often the question comes up, yeah, this all sounds great, but you don't know my landlord. You don't know my boss. You don't know the supplier I'm dealing with. Yeah, I got your back. We're going to have a segment where I'll actually give you specific things you can do to deal with your emotions and your Godzilla so that you're ready for that and you'll be effective without need to be afraid. We'll put it all together. We'll be done. And afterwards, if you want, no obligation, it's a total freebie. Um, I'll invite you to actually try it out with a role play where I'll simulate a negotiation playing the tough counterpart, and we'll see how you do. It's called a fishbowl, where I'll call on one person and I'll call on another, and you can try out negotiating. And that's just simply an optional thing. It's a good way to really raise your skills in a fun, swift way, but it's strictly optional. So let me just see if that raises any questions as we set out together. Welcome your thoughts. Seeing a thumbs up, but questions? Yes, Lana? Okay. All right, then I will proceed accordingly. So, um, one last thing, is this training really worth your time? I mean, you're investing 90 minutes and you've had a long day and you got to, watching Zoom isn't always the easiest thing. And you're listening to me, and as charming and as scintillating as I can be, 90 minutes, right? So let me give you a word of encouragement. There are no guarantees, but here's a reasonable estimate based on research. The average increased value from applying the negotiating principles that we will be developing, research suggests can increase the value to you of a given deal by 11%. So if you're negotiating, say, a $10,000 a month matter, and we improve that for you by 11%, well, that would save you $1,100 a month or $13,000 and change a year. Just that one transaction. Well, if we had 10 other negotiations this year, each one worth that much, well, that would be worth an additional 11,000. And so together, that would be worth $24,000. Now, no guarantee, but it actually could be even better than that, because the research also suggests that if you do this stuff, the average increased value the other person gets if you apply these skills is 6%. You get that? Not only is this going to help you, it can really help the other. So you both can be happy more than you might have expected. And you can come back home and say, we're really happy. If you want to, if you want to split it evenly or even be generous, you can do that. But you have that potential using this material. So with that in mind, be encouraged and let's see, all right, let's talk about collaborative bargaining. How do you do it? Well, it starts with this question: how can you break out of this vicious spiral that we often get into with distributive bargaining? And the answer is that this is a way that can enable you to be hard on the problem, soft on the person. Hard on the problem, soft on the person. All your life you've wondered, should you be tough or nice? And especially, if you're a Christian, you really grapple with that. You're in New York where life is tough, and there's a certain aggressiveness to things, and yet, you want to be nice. And so you might set out saying, well, I'm going to be nice. And you might find you're turning into roadkill. And you go, well, this isn't working. I guess if I'm in New York, I got to really kind of toughen up. And so you start getting tough with people and they go, what's wrong with you? Why are you talking to me like that? And you go, that's not working either. So should you be nice or tough? And collaborative negotiating says, yes, be both. Be hard on the problem, soft on the person. Now, we'll figure out in a moment how to do that, but just think about this. If we can do that, you see how this squares the circle and resolves that conundrum you've been dealing with all this time? Because it means you can fight as hard as you need to for the things you really care for, and yet do it in a way that's humane and compassionate and even caring for the other person. Sincerely so. Indeed, this is at the very heart of what I'm teaching, what I want as a parent to highlight for my children. I want them to develop the ability to be strong and kind, If they're not strong, then their kindness could actually be just an expression of weakness, and they really won't be that kind at all. If they're just strong, they could wind up hurting people. But if you combine these qualities, which by the way are very, very much consistent with a Christian understanding of the world, you can do goodness with confidence. And it's something I love about this work. So how do you do it? Well, I'm going to now give you the secret recipe. It's literally one sentence. And if you get the next sentence I utter, you've got the gist of collaborative bargaining, the secret to hard on the problem, soft on the person, and basically the thesis statement for the book Getting to Yes, and much of what the field itself is all about. So here it is. Focus on interests, not positions, and then reconcile them with creative options. Now, let me say that again, even though you've got it in front of you. And we're going to make the slides and the recording available to you. But let me repeat it just to highlight it. Focus on interests, not positions, and then reconcile them with creative options. Now, I could tell you what I mean by that, but instead, I'd like to show it to you with the help of something I call the parable of the orange. And so I'd like you to imagine that I've got an orange. In fact, I've got it's right on the counter. And just before our session this evening, I was down in the kitchen where the counter is, and I happened to see this one last orange. And I started to reach for it. And just as I did, don't you know, from another direction comes my 9-year-old, Rachel, and she grabs it at exactly the same moment I do. And we look at each other, we're each grabbing this thing. And I give it a tug to signal, I think I saw it first, and I am, after all, your distinguished father. And she isn't nearly as impressed with this as I was hoping she would be. And so she pulls back, and I pull a little harder, and she pulls a little harder. And before you know it, I'm on the floor. She's actually rather strong for her age. And so I say, all right, let go of the stupid thing. I'll cut it in half. And fortunately, I always carry a knife with me. So I took the orange, and I cut it in half, and I go, here. Huh. And she takes her half of the orange, and I take mine. And what do you know? We each start peeling it. I take my half of the orange, I throw the meat away, I take the rind, and I go out and I make marmalade jelly with it. Meanwhile, my daughter takes her half of the orange, she takes the rind and throws it away. She takes the meat and she goes and makes orange juice with it. Now, if we had asked each other just one question, arguably even a dumb sounding question, we could have literally doubled what we each wound up with. What was the question we should have asked each other? And you can just shout it right out if you want.
The orange.
Say it again.
Why do you want that orange?
Why do I want it, said I to my daughter. You're my own daughter, and you're asking me, your sainted father, a silly question like that? What other possible reason could there be, said I, for wanting an orange besides making marmalade jelly? And then she explains it to me. And at this point, the little light bulb goes on over my head. And I go, wait a minute. You're saying you don't like marmalade jelly? And she says, no. And I say, you're saying you actually like juice? And she says, yeah, I do. She says, wait a minute. I said, wait a minute. So I go retrieve the thrown away items, and I say, here, you can have the extra meat, I'll take the rind off your hands. And what do you know? I wind up with twice as much rind, and she winds up with twice as much meat, thanks to your brilliant question. And so with that in mind, let me show you what just happened, because it's actually central to this idea. Think of it this way. We were on opposite sides, Rachel and I, of a canyon. I was saying, I want the orange. And she was saying, no, I want the orange. We were, by definition, taking positions. What is a position? It's a really important idea that I invite you to really take note of. And it simply means this. A position is the thing you say you want. You know, it's your demand. It's the one and only thing you think will make you happy. There's nothing, now I'll give you an example. Many people talk about having a salary negotiation, and they go in thinking, I gotta have this much money. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is a danger. Because what if the other one simply can't or won't give you the thing you say you want? Well, what can you do? You can say it louder. You can turn it into a test of rights or power. You could enter into a mediocre compromise, maybe like Rachel and I did, Or before even that happened, you might wind up just getting angry at each other and walking away. You can't deal with people like that. But what if instead we asked the seemingly dumb but actually brilliant question, wait a minute, why do you want it? When you ask that brilliant question, and you can ask it in 100 different ways, you're going below the level of positions to the level of interests. What is an interest? It's a second really powerful idea that I really would love you to take note of. And it's this: an interest is your underlying need. You get that? It's your deeper concern, your true underlying purpose, your goal, your true goal, your real motivation, and so on. And we've got like 100 other words in the English language that are synonyms. That's how big this idea is. So for example, you could say, I got to have more salary. Well, that's your position. Why do you want more salary? What do you mean, why do I want more salary? Isn't it obvious? I need to provide more for my family. Wait a minute. Is there any difference between saying I want more salary and saying I need to provide more for my family? Yeah. An employer may not be able to give you more cash, especially right now, but an employer may be able to give you several other things that might be every bit as good and maybe even better, that provide well for your family. In other words, you have more prospects now. So it turns out at the level of interests, there's often no conflict at all, because even though our interests are different, they may harmonize, they may mesh. And when we discover our interests mesh, rejoice. We've got a word for that. We call those complementary interests. They're different, but not conflicting. How cool is that? And even better, when we discover that, we very usually find that there is a creative option that can make us both happier. In our story, how about I get all the rind and you get all the meat, Rachel? And we were both delighted with that deal. And what do you know? Each of our interests was well served. Now, you might hear this and go, that's your big thing? Really? You're a professor at Columbia and NYU, and this is your marquee idea? That's what they pay you for? I know, it's weird, isn't it? You might rightly say, I don't see how this actually is going to work for me in real life. It's a nice little story, but does this really make a difference? And I'll let you in a secret. That is a totally legitimate objection. Can this idea of focusing on interests, not positions, and then reconciling with creative options, can it actually work in the rough and tumble of the real world? So let's test it out. And I'll give you two examples. One is the Middle East. And there, this very idea is responsible not once, but twice in the last several decades for bringing forth peace treaties between Israel and other Arab states when no one thought it was possible. And it happened when people started to ask the question, wait a minute, why do you want it? Why do you want the Sinai? Why do you want the water rights? And what do you know? The Camp David Peace Accords and the Jordanian-Israeli Peace Accords lived and happened and have survived because of this idea. That's just one example. I'll give you another. I have a client called Rice Energy. They're an oil and gas exploration firm in the outskirts of Pittsburgh. And we did a one-day training for them in 2016, just as they were coming out of recession. And things were really, really tough. And we walked through this very idea. It wasn't the only thing we covered, but it was definitely a foundational idea. And then I went away. And a year later, I called my contact there and I asked him, did the training make a difference for you? And my contact said, well, yeah, actually, it's been fantastic. And I said, really? Tell me. And he goes, well, we put it to use. We spoke to strategically important suppliers. We struck some deals that they were really happy with and we were ecstatic about. And as a result, over the course of the last year, while the other competitors in our industry were struggling, we saved $100 million. In fact, it was so good that the company was bought out, the founders became millionaires, and the suppliers loved Rice Energy. And I thought, oh my God, this stuff really works. So whether you're talking about Middle East peace or a major company that's struggling, or you're talking about sharing an orange with a child, this idea has real power. And I've seen hundreds of times my students putting it to use. directly and indirectly. So in a moment, so let me just show you how you can make it operational, then I'll welcome any thoughts or questions you have. How do you actually practice this in the real world? Well, it starts with a seemingly strange question. What do I want and why? Yes, we may want lower rent. Yes, we may want a higher salary, but why do we want these things? And counterintuitively, that's the key to discovering more opportunity. But even more so is an even more counterintuitive question, what does the other person want and why? And here you actually discover that caring about the other person's needs, even when they seem contentious and difficult, is a huge insight that can reveal these kinds of opportunities. And what other group do I have the privilege of working with that already is ready and able to think and care about the other, even somebody who's difficult, than my fellow brothers and sisters at All Angels. So this is one of the reasons I love this work, because it so resonates with what you and I believe in. Well, anyway, loving even somebody who's adverse to us. It's actually, what do you know? It's enlightened self-interest as well as a caring thing to do. Those are the first critical questions, and we're going to actually practice in a moment your ability to do just those things. Related to that is another question: learn the facts. And great negotiators are great learners. They learn, baby, learn. And just going in without doing that is one of the reasons why many negotiators are fairly ineffective. So we're going to develop your ability to do that too. The third thing is this: options. That is, thinking about a possible deal term, something that one of you can offer to the other. You get that? Something you could ask for, something you could offer. But anything like that that might help mesh interest, that might satisfy somebody's need, maybe yours, maybe the others, anything that's creative like that is something well worth thinking about. So really there are three keys to collaborative negotiation: interests, facts, and options. And believe it or not, that is much of what it takes to do this work. You may even be ready to win a Nobel Peace Prize in just a short while. Let me welcome your questions or comments, and then I'll throw you into it.
I think I'm noticing, Seth, that obviously this makes a lot of sense and seems like it's easier to harness when all the parties understand we're negotiating something. Probably I find myself more in situations where the subtext is negotiating, not not overt negotiating.
So that's one of the reasons why even the word itself, I'm increasingly feeling, may not be very helpful, because a conversation, a talk, even communication, call it what you will, very, very often these ideas can actually be pivotal, even when the one you're dealing with has no idea that we're negotiating or wants to, or is. And I'll give you one quick example. A Welsh doctor told me this story. An 83-year-old man is raced into emergency surgery presenting symptoms of a coronary. She's the doctor on call. She stabilizes him, intubates, stabilizes him, gets fluids going, gets the heart monitored. She says to him, Mr. Smith, you've just had a heart attack. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to be moving you to the ICU. You're going to be with us for a few days. We're going to get you stabilized and you should be okay. But it is a very critical situation. He said, no. And she said, what do you mean no? And he says, I'm leaving. And she says, well, sir, you can't leave. He says, I absolutely have to. I'm not staying here. And she says, sir, and she figures, oh, he must not be understanding. So she says it 3, 4, 5 times. If you go, you're going to flatline in the taxi to your house. You're going to die. Do you understand this? And he says, I am not staying, I'm leaving. And she's at her wit's end. At some point she's got to let him go. So finally, in exasperation, she says, Mr. Smith, why do you have to go? He said, because my dog is sick and needs me. And she said, well, Mr. Smith, what if we called your neighbor and asked her to take care of him while you're here? He goes, oh, then I'd stay. So she called the neighbor, and the neighbor took care of the dog, and the man's life was saved. And when I've talked about this with EMT workers and nurses and doctors, they've said, yeah, this is a game-changing distinction. And does Mr. Smith know he's negotiating? Of course not. But did interest-based bargaining save his life? Absolutely. Does that get at your very good point, Marielle?
Absolutely, yeah. Right on the nose.
Yeah. I got other material too. Others?
Yeah, Seth, I really appreciate how human-centered your framing of negotiation is. But I wonder about something that Bob Rice alluded to in his story. He said, at that time, these were not giant staffs. There was one guy handling all of the licensing for New York.
Yep.
So he knew who to go negotiate with, and he knew that that guy he was negotiating with had the authority to make some kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, when he was talking to the JCPenney buyer, that buyer had to go get the vice president
Yep.
of. But I find that in the 21st century, oftentimes the people I would need to negotiate with are global mega corporations who don't even staff customer service departments anymore. They have some online form that you fill out.
Yep.
And I got into a situation with Chase Bank where we were in a legal dispute, and I couldn't even figure out where to file, like who to list as the counterparty in small claims court because they're such a monstrous corporation. And when I eventually did get in touch with another human, it was a paralegal from the litigation department who obviously was authorized to do exactly one thing. Do you have any advice for what human-centered, like others-centered negotiation looks like when you're dealing with something that doesn't appear to be human?
Absolutely. And by the way, as a former corporate lawyer, I'll tell you that technically that is actually the term of art we use, monstrous corporation. So you're not alone. This is a very common experience. There are situations where you are dealing bureaucratically with this faceless, nameless, unstoppable force. I've even had the same pleasure myself, especially if it's a small matter. It can be maddening. But be of good cheer, because one of the nice things about this work, I'll break it down in two parts. If you're dealing with a small claim against a large corporation, you may have to do some research, partly to find out what are your alternatives to agreement. Indeed, that's something that's implicit in what we're talking about. When I talk about facts, one of the things that you want to learn is, well, if we can't agree, what can I do instead? And Mike, I'm sure will affirm this, that litigation is usually your worst, your last recourse, especially if you're dealing with a loss with a monstrous company. They are not intimidated by you or me at all. The threat of litigation is the last thing they're worried about. Indeed, small claims court may not be particularly meaningful to them, because try and collect. That's the other part of the problem. So it's a good idea to be creative on that side too. And in the days of the internet, one thing that a company is much more concerned about potentially is their reputation. I've seen companies literally within an hour lose their reputation because of something that happened online. I'm not saying that you and I should just start, going to mommy bloggers and causing a major company to fall to its knees because we're complaining about a product. But you get the idea that it's a little bit like the Death Star sometimes. They do have these openings that can make them vulnerable. And our goal here is not to, not to become, see them like monsters and we're trying to destroy them, but we're trying to be strong and kind. And so part of that task is to bring them to their senses, not their knees. Easy for me to say. There are situations like the one you're facing where, they might just be filing their nails and send a flunky who's no way going to take any attention to you. But even when it seems like you are powerless, there are specific things you can do. One of them is to make it worth their while to deal with you. And that's why having creative options is a good idea, because even though they could sue you, let's say a landlord could sue you for eviction, taste of coming attractions. Yeah, they could, but do you know how long the line is right now to evict people? So they're not crazy about evicting, even though they're going to say they are. And if you can make it more attractive to them, as we say, build them a golden bridge, make it look like, hey, yes is less painful, they might still be willing to deal with you, even if they seem monstrous. And part of our work is getting to that point. Does that start to help, James? Okay, great. I myself have had situations where I have dealt with a monstrous corporation. I remember once I had an insurance company that had promised me that I would be covered. I even wrote it down. And then when I went to file a claim, you're not covered. And they gave me the letter, right? What to do. So I called them and they gave me a paralegal like you got, and not much followed. So I wrote a letter to the highest ranking person I could reach. And basically what I did was show strength and kindness. I said, I've very much enjoyed having your brokerage firm to work with when I've been seeking medical insurance. You've been very professional and I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to continuing that. I must tell you, I was quite disappointed recently when I learned that the insurance that you represented to me, the insurance carrier told me that I would not be covered, even though one of your brokers specifically shared with me that I would be for this specific charge. See the attached letter where I note the date and the name of the agent. I hope I won't have to bring this matter to the attention of the New York State Insurance Commissioner and to the American Bar and to the New York State Bar Association, through which I have insurance with you, though I will if I have to. But I'm confident we don't have to go that way, and I'm very flexible about how we work this out as long as my key needs are met. And a week later, I got a check for the full amount. Now, what I hope I was doing there, I mean, that's kind of a last-ditch way to signal resolve, but what I hope I was doing there was being strong and kind. I was trying to signal respect, warning, flexibility. And if I showed weakness in the middle, it wouldn't have been credible. If I'd showed that I was just screaming at them, that might have made me seem like a crank. But because I was willing to give them a choice, they responded. Does that get at your good question, James? I've gone a little longer because I know this is a fairly common experience we all have. Others? Okay, then I'm going to stop talking and get you into the game, as it were, or I'm going to talk less. And I want to share with you a real life scenario exercise. And this is about negotiating with a landlord in the time of COVID-19. Now, I have a choice for you, and I really want to get your sense. So I have two versions of this exercise. One is for a commercial lease for a business. A small deli in Harlem. Another is for a residential apartment. In each case, a landlord, and we've got some money issues. So if you would like me to do the exercise involving the delicatessen, where you are a small business owner, would you kindly raise your hand to your face, please? If you would prefer that I do the exercise with a residential lease, would you raise your hand, please? Okay, residential lease it is. So I had a feeling. So let me go to that right now. So here we go. As we go through the following brief story together and the three questions that follow, imagine that you're actually getting ready to meet with your own landlord. Top property owners report that most tenants are very unprepared to renegotiate their leases, and so are quite ineffective. That's why when you negotiate, you often feel like you're dealing with Godzilla. We're going to start to fix that for you right now. We'll do it by developing your ability to practice the three keys of collaborative negotiation: interests, facts, and options. You might want to take screenshots of the next 5 slides. That's the story I'm going to share with you. And you also might want to take notes of the ideas that we are about to develop together, because they can actually be useful for you. I've actually used some of the very ideas we're going to discuss in a recent negotiation with my landlord, very amicable, and it worked out really well. So this stuff, I actually, I'm a customer as well as a salesman here. Also use what follows as an example of how to get ready for other important negotiations too, with suppliers, with creditors, with employees, and so on. Please don't think this is just training you to deal with your landlord. Think of it as just a case study, and we can map it and so increase its value in many different ways if you take it that way. So here's the story. You've rented an apartment in Upper Manhattan from the same landlord for 4 years. The rent is high, $3,500 a month. There may be a lease provision entitling you to biannual paint jobs and minor refurbishing, but you haven't checked and certainly didn't get a paint job in recent years. There have been issues with the apartment, leaks, vermin, noisy construction, but you've suffered through. Last year, you earned a decent salary. Then came COVID-19. You've been tempted, where did it go? Oh yeah, here we go, a little skip. Your family suffered a job loss 2 months ago, cutting your income 75%. You've cut back across the board, sought new work, and you're searching for other ways to cut costs and save cash. Unemployment insurance and the new PPI program help some, though not all the money has come in yet. Regardless, at the rate you're going, you will be out of cash in 2 to 4 months, so cash is critical. You simply don't know what the future holds. Your family feels the job loss isn't forever. There may well be fairly strong prospects for future employment after the pandemic eases, and you're hopeful, but nothing is certain. Since rent makes up almost half of your expenses, you've realized you need to deal with the landlord and, if at all possible, give yourself the flexibility you need to change plans to adapt. You've been tempted to simply not pay and not talk to your landlord, since he can be rather difficult. But you know you can't avoid him forever. You've realized you need to renegotiate with him. You think the only thing to do is to ask him to waive the rent for now, but you fear he'll simply say no and threaten eviction, or only give you a slight, brief waiver. You don't know that much about the landlord or the building. You do know he has 8 other tenants, one of them a banker, and 2 vacancies, both of which opened up last month when 2 other tenants left. You think the owner has a mortgage on the property. Brenda, a fellow tenant you're in good terms with, says that while the landlord tends to be curt, she thinks the landlord is concerned about vacancies, a resulting cash shortfall, the risk of defaulting on his mortgage, and the trouble of finding reliable tenants in this economy. She adds that while the landlord sometimes threatens eviction, she speculates he may be worried the eviction process could stall if the courts are backlogged. He seems to have struck a better deal with the banker last year because the banker offered stability. So as you get ready to open talks with the landlord, you wonder, what should you do before you meet with him, and what hope do you have for this critical conversation? So here's what we're going to do next, guys. The first thing we want to do is think about the interests. And so in a moment, what I'm going to do is ask you, working with a fellow participant in a breakout room, I'm going to let you get into, I'm going to ask you to take, let's call it 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and list 3 interests that you, the tenant, have. Then 3 interests the landlord likely has. And by interest, remember what we mean is an underlying concern or need, not merely a position. So for example, a demand. For example, cut the rent 20%. Well, that would be a position. Whereas improved cash flow might be one of several underlying interests you have for making the rent cut. Does that make sense? Let me just check and see if that raises any questions for you. Okay. Do you need me to go back and make a photo so you can do a screenshot of the story? I can do that if you'd like. Okay, then let me then stop talking and get you into a breakout room. Let me get out of mine, get out of this myself. Okay. Oh no, I don't have breakout room privileges for some reason. Marianne, I wonder if there's any way that you can help us. I don't seem to have the breakout room. I think that may.
Oh, you know, oh my goodness, we're on Anne's account and it didn't occur to me.
It's okay. Tell you what, can you create breakout rooms, please?
I am unable because I think she hasn't enabled it in
All
the account.
Then we can watch how flexible I am. No problem.
Watch this. Yeah.
It's no big deal. So here's what I'm going to do. We'll just do it together. All right. So what I'm going to invite you to do is if I call on you, we'll tell you what, why don't you do this? Take 30 seconds and write down some interest that you have in this story. Make it a minute. I'll give you a minute. That's my final offer. A minute.
I can't even read that.
Wait a minute. Is that ice cream I hear outside?
Yeah, that's outside my window, actually, in Brooklyn.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm hungry. And then if you would please take another minute and jot down 3 interests that you think the landlord might have. I'll be right back. I'm just going to turn on the air conditioning. Okay, guys, of course you could do more and more time, but let's see what you got after we've taken a well-deserved 3-minute break. I want to make sure I don't talk you off. So 3 minutes, please. We'll start at 8 o'clock. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. I want to respect your time. I think we've got a quorum, so I'm just going to go for it. So, Jeanette, why don't I start with you? What's one interest that you, the tenant, have here?
Stability.
Stability. Yeah, you do not want to have to be moving around if you can avoid it. Yeah, real good. James, what's one you got here?
Well, I said you're probably interested in staying in place, but that may not be true because I think some people are responding to the pandemic by deciding it's time to leave New York. And if you were stuck in a long-term lease, you might have a different interest entirely.
Okay, so there could be different kinds of stability.
Yeah.
So that might not necessarily mean staying in the same apartment. Got it. But what do you care about then?
Probably providing for whoever lives with you, making sure you have some place to live.
Provide for my family, and you also want a decent place to live. Good. Let's see, Thomas, anything else?
Yeah, I thought affordable rent.
Affordable, absolutely. And why do you want affordable rent? I know, dumb question.
Well, actually, I guess the living, the standards of living.
Okay. You mean just your family feels like we could live better than we do?
Well, not necessarily better. I think it's also stability, because if your rent takes up a certain amount of your income, it becomes more tenuous.
Oh, I see. Okay. One reason is you want quality of life.
Right.
But yeah, maybe quality of life. You're cutting back so much other costs.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And Lana, what else do you care about here?
I would echo that quality of living, but you mentioned that there have been rodents in this apartment, so I want to live in a clean environment.
Yeah, we want a clean, clean, quiet, refreshed apartment. Very good. And notice one that begs to be mentioned, and that is you got a cash flow problem. And as you probably know in business, cash is to business what blood is to medicine, to the body. It's life, at least in the financial sense. And here, making rent is no small thing. So it's a good thing to have cash flow in mind. All right, let's talk about the landlord. Let's see, Michelle. Sorry, Mary Ellen. Anything the landlord cares about here?
The landlord also cared about cash flow, but he
Yeah.
might have this banker relationship. He might be able to extend for a little bit.
Okay. Right. So that could be a variable there. Sure. Let's see. Jeanette.
No more vacancies.
Okay. Yeah. No vacancies. Yeah. That's a real concern. And just to give you a taste of coming attractions, what if you actually knew somebody who would be interested in this apartment? You have to ask yourself, would you recommend it? But there's some people who might actually say, oh, that's no problem. You should see the place I'm in now. And if you could help this landlord fill a vacancy, that might be of some interest, just to get you thinking about the future. Lana, anything else?
Yeah, he'd like to attract new tenants.
Okay, so attract tenants, good.
Mm-hmm.
Give you a twofer on that one. Thomas, anything else?
I think it would also be in his interest to avoid evictions if possible.
Avoid costly.
The court proceedings of evictions because of the times of consumption, as well as the fact that he wouldn't get paid with an eviction. It would be better to make deals with tenants to try to get some money.
Okay, let me quickly share with you something I just learned today. There are landlords who are taking a no a no tolerance view toward non-payment and are just going for eviction. But and in theory, it's easy for them to win in court because the system is kind of stacked, especially against those who do not have access to lawyers. And even if you have a case, it doesn't work too well if you are trying to defend yourself. But yeah, it's a much more long, time-consuming, frustrating process for everyone now because of the huge tidal wave of cases that are hitting the courts. So yeah, that could be a real. He could threaten it, but maybe he'd rather avoid it. And you're onto a key reason why settling might be a big part of this. In the interest of time, let's just observe that one of these, avoiding costly eviction, is probably something you share. And a common interest is something that can be particularly persuasive. There's another one we could also appeal to that's often persuasive, and that's fairness. The research is strong that skilled negotiators are especially good at appealing to common interest. Look, we're both on the same side here. And my students have reported overwhelmingly that's a big one for them. So if you can see something that both of us care about, that can get you literally and figuratively on the same page. Guys, in short order, you've come up with a really nice list of interests. And again, it's not an academic exercise. What we're going to be doing in short order is thinking about how this can translate into real prospects. Now, I'll give you a confession. I'm running a little late. So I'm going to invite you to watch with me as I cover the second question and invite you to just imagine you're doing this. The second question is this: factual research. What we want to do is take a little bit of time and think of questions that you'd like to research the answers to that might help you negotiate this matter more successfully. That is at least two things, for the sake of exercise, that you'd like to learn before you talk to your landlord. And then you want to think about where you're going to go for answers. Well, since time is a little bit short for us, what I'm going to do is give you some examples of some factual research questions that could be really useful to learn the answers to. One is to go talk to a broker and find out what the rents are for similar spaces in the neighborhood, with similar spaces, in similar locations. You might also learn from your broker what eviction practices are and how long it's taking, so you're not just speculating. And then wow, it's 6 months. That's usually, it's like typically 2, but now it's 6. That's a real deterrent. You might also learn from your broker, and Mike backed me up on this, that there's actually an argument that might have relevance here. It's called a breach of warranty of habitability. And it turns out that that argument, especially in a case like yours, can defeat some eviction cases. You might very well want a lawyer to advise you on this. But recently, when lawyers were provided at tenant courts, and that argument was used by lawyers, evictions went down 11% in short order. So you might want to know about that, and that turns out to be something you could learn from a good broker, maybe a lawyer. You might want to know what your income and budget are and be ready to share that with your landlord so that she can actually see the numbers, so that she knows that you are actually thinking seriously about this. How about the project cost that the landlord, projected cost the landlord faces from vacancy, from lost rent, from the search cost, from the risk? That might be worth quantifying, and just to remind him in a polite way, maybe that's not such a good scenario for you. What might be your less expensive spaces that you'd be comfortable with? What are the moving and relocation costs? That could give you a benchmark to think about. What are the lease terms? Remember, there was that point that you might have a right to painting and refurbishing. You never got that. Good thing you have a copy of your lease, and just spending a little time reading it over might reveal, hey, they owe me a $2,000 paint job. Never got that. In 4 years, they should have done it twice. That might be something to talk with them about. Maybe I'd forego that if you would do something on the rent for me. Or maybe I want the rent to stay the same, but I'd like to get that paint job now. And by the way, you might want to talk to current and former tenants about how they've dealt with the landlord. Talk to the banker. Maybe the banker has wisdom about how to talk with the landlord. Maybe you could talk to someone who could guarantee your rent for the time being. Maybe you have a rich uncle who can't pay your rent, but might be willing to guarantee that could be a reassurance, and so on and so on. You see how you're learning more, you start to get empowered, literally. That's part of the practice here. And let me welcome your questions about that much. Okay, guys, the last step is the particularly big one. And that is, and I'm going to actually ask you to try this now. I'm going to ask you to take a couple, just a minute, just because time is a little short, and list several options you might propose that might help you satisfy an interest the landlord has, or an interest that you have, or both. For example, one way to help your cash flow might be to pay the landlord with food. Maybe you have, maybe you work in the food business and you have lots of extra food lying around, and maybe, paying in kind would be a useful thing. Or maybe you do a service. Maybe you're a bookkeeper and the landlord really needs bookkeeping services. That, that might be something to think about. Make sure one idea is crazy, because it helps you get creative. And I'm going to give you the list of interests that we came up with. Why don't you take a minute or so, come up with some creative options, we'll talk about it. Take another moment or two, see if you can come up with at least one more. Sorry, where did that go? I'm sorry, I just messed you up. There we go. Okay, of course you can do more and more time, but let's see what you came up with in short order here, guys. So if I call on you, if you do me the kindness of sharing one creative option off of your list, I'd appreciate it. So Lana, let me go to you first. Any ideas?
Is the creative the same as the crazy idea, or are you
Yeah, that's
asking?
fine. Any crazy, sober as a banker, anything you like.
Okay. Well, if my building has vacancies, would they generate a custom short-term lease so that I can have family come and stay to cut down on childcare costs?
I like that. A custom short-term lease for family to do child care. Boy, what a great idea, because then you have an inexpensive source of childcare, so you can go find a job, or someone in your family can. They get some cash flow and vacancy filled. Really cool. I like that. You see how that ticks off several issues, that we've got several interests. I really like that. And I never would have thought of it. James, let me go to you.
Sure, with all the time on my hands, now that I'm out of a job, I have nothing better to do than to fix all the things that are broken in the apartment. So obviously, the landlord doesn't have a good super because we've had leaks and rats and all of that. So I get to offer to perform some of the repairs around the building in exchange for a reduction in rent.
Sure. Help. I'll give you two for help with repairs is in-kind rent or help with repairs in exchange, exchange for rent reduction. I'll give you 2 for that. Really cool. Mary Ellen?
I'm going to offer to paint the empty apartments and advertise for rent reduction.
Okay. I'll have to consult with my lawyer on that one, but yeah, if you're willing to, that's kind of an, if they agree to that, you could be the painter and you would be paid in kind, or you could be paying rent in kind. Very creative idea. Let's see, Thomas?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I came up with is already up, but I have one that was organized, a tenant association, to create a whole different environment in the building to enhance the building all around. Like, you know, I mean, it was the last one on my list. I didn't know what else to put.
Very creative, and that could be a collaboration with the landlord. It could also flex muscle against the landlord. So we'd want to put a little asterisk against next to that, because I want to make sure you get that what we're talking about are things you could agree with.
Right, but I really wanted to have it to work with the landlord to enhance the whole building. As we become partners in a sense.
Okay, very creative. And by the way, I was just learning that you could agree with a landlord day 1 to make some very creative arrangement. And then day 2 hear from the government, which says, I'm sorry, you cannot do that because of a concept called disparate treatment, which is designed to protect against unfair treatment of people who are minorities, people who are often unfairly treated. And so there's often a landlord may find, oh, I can't do it for you unless I do it for everyone. Well, good thing you organize the tenants so you could in effect negotiate on their behalf and everyone gets something that everyone's comfortable with. So really creative idea. Let me get one more in the interest of time. Let's see, Jeanette. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeanette. Forgive me. I'm gonna ask Bethany. Bethany, if you're there, let me see if you got any thoughts.
I don't know. I was kind of thinking about like the doing projects around the building thing. So I don't know if I have any new ideas.
Okay. In the interest of time, then I'm going to just mark it and say we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 really creative ideas, guys. And what do you know? There might be a germ or maybe even a very definite idea here that could very well resonate with an attorney, with a lawyer, a landlord. Let me show you that there's actually even more where that came from. And hopefully you'll find, yeah, this is good news. Because first of all, start with that. Here are 15 different ways to deal with the cash flow and cost issue. You could agree to a partial rent rebate, maybe a total rent rebate, maybe a partial rent deferral or a rent deferral with interest. How about a partial rent abatement and an extended lease? How about a rent reduction, 10% for the rest of the term? How about permission to sublease part of your space? Space reduction for no fee. I'll take a smaller apartment. How about, we'll forget the common areas thing. Reduce rent and forego services that you're entitled to, like the paint job. How about a percentage of rent, forget that one. And we said the in-kind rent paying in food or services. You came up with that one already. But it gets even better. You could also agree to a way to assure stability and security for one or both of you. How about an early lease renewal? Or maybe you could give an upfront payment. Maybe you or a loved one who can guarantee. Maybe you could apply the current deposit toward the rent. You could have a guarantor. You could increase or reduce the deposit. There are other possibilities as well. And how about month-to-month leasing if you need flexibility and they need to be just getting day-to-day income, and we'll renegotiate down the road, and so on and so on. This is a list of 34 different ideas, many of which may not be relevant, but just 2 or 3 of them may be game-changing. To the point, I had a student who called me with a landlord-tenant problem, very much like the one that you and I are rehearsing. It was, his mother and he depended on solving this, because their lives alone and together would have been miserable if they couldn't work things out in this landlord-tenant relationship. It was in Argentina that this was unfolding. We did exactly the things that you and I are talking about now. He put it to use, talked it over, and what do you know? The landlord-tenant relationship was dramatically better. The mother and he are in much better shape financially. He and the other are in very good relationship, and they wouldn't have thought that they could do this until they started going through this process. And I myself have used a very similar process recently with my tenant, with my landlord. So you are now readier to negotiate than most negotiators, and you're nearly ready to negotiate generally. But since time is a little short, I'm going to move a little quickly. Jot down any questions you have for the end, and I promise I'll get to them. But I do have a promise to keep with you, and that is to look at the question of how do you negotiate competitively? Now you've got a sense of the collaborative side. Now you need to know a little about the competitive. And the good news is this is a fairly simple matter. Basically, there's just a few things you need to know to be much readier than most people are. Most people think it's about being tough and making a big number demand, but actually there's more to it than that. The research is clear that skilled negotiators do better by having ranges, by knowing what's the best and the worst they'll accept on an issue. The reason is surprising. I would have thought, just go in and go for it. No, if you do that, you don't have any real sense of what is a good number to seek. And you can be wildly off and drive people and yourself crazy. So you really need to know the best target. On the other hand, if you get pushed back and back and back and back, when do you say stop? No, I'm not going any further. Most people who negotiate don't know the answer to that question. So they often agree to an awful deal and live to regret it. So the first step is to know the best target. And by that, what we mean is the best you reasonably hope to get based on research. You get that? You want to actually ground anything you're seeking in evidence. You don't want to just pull a number out of the air. To be very clear, this is not your opening offer. This is an actual confidential number you hope to wind up with. We'll talk about the opening offer in just a moment, but I want to make sure you get that right now we're trying to identify what you actually reasonably hope to wind up with. And that's a crucial idea, the best target. It'll be foundational for other things. With that, imagine that your research shows that the least another store owner pays, another tenant pays for a store similar to yours is $20,000 a month. Slightly different scenario. That's the least anyone like you is paying for a store like this. Well, that might suggest that your best target should be something like 20,000. They're not getting much better than that. And that gives you some reference point. On the other hand, your walk away is your worst acceptable outcome. And again, this is based on your research. So for example, imagine that you found another site for a store that you run that another landlord will rent to you for $26,000 a month. Okay, now you have a range. 20,000 is the best you hope to pay. 26 is the worst. And if you have to pay more, you'll move. That gives you some range to maneuver. If therefore the landlord says, I must have 30,000, well, you immediately know that that's not going to work. And assuming money is the deciding factor, then you know to say, look, I'd love to work with you. I do have another opportunity that's better, but I don't think I have to move or end this. I'm flexible about how we do it as long as we come up with a fair number. And let me offer some suggestions. And now you're nudging the conversation toward eventually your best target. Now, I said that the best target is not your opening offer. You should plan to cushion your first offer. In this story, you would ask initially to pay $17,000 or maybe $15,000 negotiable or $19,500. And the reason is psychological. People need the ability to win a concession from you. And so you want a cushion lets you make concessions the other negotiator appreciates, and you can still wind up with your best target if you cushioned thoughtfully. The last thing here is to add this. In Godzilla situations where you're dealing with someone who's extremely powerful, the bargaining range may actually be very narrow and low for you unless you're still deploying creative options that satisfy the Godzilla's interest well. So when you feel like you've got a gun to your head, you might say, look, it'll actually, rather than killing me, you might actually do better if you work with me on a creative side. And then the gun goes down. You say, well, what are you talking about? And then you can deploy both these skills that we're talking about, creative and competitive. More on that in a moment. So here are the basic principles for being more competitive. Set a best target, set a walk away, cushion your first offers, and get ready for Godzilla. Let me pause and welcome any thoughts or questions about that much. Okay, then I will keep the third part of my promise, and that is, how do you put these ideas together? Can you create and claim? And the answer is yes, you can in short order. And what we want to do is two things: cushion and signal a willingness to be creative. If you've done the other work I've just suggested, you can actually speak to the other in a way that allows you to do both by signaling, by cushioning and signaling a willingness to be creative. And I'll give you a quick example. Well, now that we've talked a while and I have a better sense of your concerns, let me make a proposal and see what you think. I'm flexible about the terms as long as we satisfy my key needs. Did you see what just happened here? This is not someone who's loud, aggressive, or mean-spirited. Rather, this person is doing something very striking. This person is going slowly. She's listening for interests. She's not demanding, she's suggesting. She's saying, I'm flexible as long as my interests are served. You get that? She's already signaling, I'm going to be strong and kind. All in just a couple of sentences after going slowly. Really cool. Then she makes this offer, and here we're envisioning that she is a store tenant. She has a store and she's leasing. She says, to help us both improve the odds that we've got a viable, responsible, rent-paying business in the space this year, I'd suggest a rent reduction to $15,000 per month negotiable for the rest of the term, plus your approval to add hot food service and a takeout window. I'd be willing to waive the paint job we're due and add a limited guarantor for the balance of the term. You see what's going on here? Look at that. First of all, she's well cushioned. She's asking for considerably better deal than the $20,000 that she's shooting for. She's also signaling a willingness to be creative, partly by offering creative options, and she's appealing to the other's interests too. So there's both collaborative negotiating and competitive negotiating going on. She's doing it in a very respectful, thoughtful way that actually offers an idea that could work well for this landlord, and it's a starting point for conversation. So let me pause and welcome your questions about that much, and we're just about done, guys. Okay, then let me do it this way. What about, oh yes, Mike.
I'm muted.
No, you're not.
This stuff is great. Have you personally written a book on this, or is one forthcoming? Because I'd love to.
We didn't rehearse this, did we, Mike?
No, and I don't, and I'm not like, I don't have a royalty deal with you or anything. Just like.
It's funny you should ask. Stay with me. If I don't answer that in 3 minutes, you come after me, okay?
All right. Best and last and final offer.
Okay, great. What about Godzilla? I'm going to give you 2 quick answers. Would you like to know the most important negotiating skill of them all? This is a New York Police Department hostage negotiator, and he's actually deploying it in this picture. It's their secret weapon, so important that they literally make it their motto. What's their motto? Talk to me. In other words, their secret weapon is highly skilled listening. And time prevents me from developing that. But incredibly, well, we usually think of negotiators as talkers. Actually, the best ones are great listeners. And we've even seen a hint of that in that earlier story where we saw the negotiator saying, well, now that we've talked and I have a better sense of your concerns. You get that? By listening, you can discover that sort of thing. It builds rapport, it builds trust, it lowers the tension. It may be one of the most critical skills of them all. And I think it's definitely the most important for conflict. And you can do it without hurting yourself in any way. So when you're dealing with a Godzilla and you don't know what to do, just listen. That's a really good place to be early in the conversation. I'll give you one more. Before you go talk to your Godzilla, role play. That is, sit down with someone, brief her on what this Godzilla person is like, and then play out the interaction with you playing yourself and she playing the Godzilla. This is crucial. When John Kennedy met Nikita Khrushchev ripped him apart verbally. Kennedy later said it was the worst thing that ever happened to him. Why? Because Kennedy had no idea what he was getting into walking into a room with Nikita Khrushchev. He just thought his charm would be enough, not even close. Whereas if you role play, I found this, and many of my students and others have found this too, like an Olympic athlete who visualizes before a high stakes performance makes you much more emotionally ready. So if you're stressed, turn it to preparation by role playing. You'll be much more effective. So to put it all together, I'm going to sum it all up in just a little, in 1 or 2 slides. But before I do, I have one thing I'd like to do, and that is I'd like to get 1 minute of your feedback for tonight's session. And to do that, Mary Ellen, I'm going to post in the chat box. So where did it go? Uh-oh, it's gone. Why did that happen? All right, hold on, not to worry. I've got it right here. Don't go anywhere. I've got it for you right here. Boop. Okay. You give me 10 more seconds, and if I don't have it, I'm going to press on. I'll press on because I don't want to make you linger any longer. But I'm going to, afterwards, I'm going to ask Marilyn, if you do me the kindness of allowing me to send the survey to the group, I would really much appreciate it. I'd also like, in partly answering your very good question, Mike, I have a website devoted to the specific question, negotiatingrecession.com. And if you go there, you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter. I'm just starting a newsletter that specifically addresses the very kinds of questions that we're dealing with right now. But not only that, if you sign up for it, you will get a 30-minute video that elaborates on ideas that we've talked about tonight about how do you negotiate creatively and competitively. This is from an audiobook and video course that I produced for the Great Courses called The Art of Negotiating the Best Deal. If you can't get enough of me, I can give you 12 and a half hours of me. And the first 30 minutes is free. Just go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, and you can have more of me than you ever dreamed of. Okay. So Mike, thanks for shilling for me. I really appreciate it.
You're killing them.
Right. You're killing me here.
Okay. There's the link. I'll put this up in the chat box after we're done, if you'll do me that kindness. So if I were to sum this all up in just a few words, interest, facts, options. Okay, 3 words, you got collaborative bargaining in a nutshell. If you want the competitive side, ranges and cushions. You identify your ranges and then set a cushion, you got yourself much of what it takes to be competitively effective. And if you want to put it all together, go and suggest. And don't demand, suggest, just like Bob Reese did, and you'll be in a much better place. I'm going to invite you to try this out in a capstone 20-minute simulated negotiation with me afterwards to build your skills. I will play the landlord, you can play the tenant, and we'll see if you can deal with a tough New York landlord using these skills. But regardless, I put it all together this way. As we said at the beginning, so at the end. It's about being honest, prepared, proactive, and creative. And don't let anyone tell you it's about being loud and obnoxious and aggressive. You can be far more effective without doing any of that, I promise you. So if you'd like more guidance than we could cover tonight, first, you might want to check out the Small Business Development Corporation. We have one here at Columbia in Harlem. I work with them. They're lovely, and they have all kinds of resources for business matters. I recommend the book Getting to Yes if you'd like to know more about the collaborative side. They literally wrote the book on that, and they are great. It's pithy. You can even get it for free online. I think the paperback will set you back like $17, and it's really easy and well done. If you just Google a phrase like renegotiating lease, you will discover many of the ideas that I culled together. You might, how did you come up with 34 ideas? Well, guess what? Little research, and I found, oh my gosh, there's lots of ideas that are not obvious out there on the web. If you would like that course I mentioned, it's called The Art of Negotiating the Best Deal. I don't get very much out of it, so I feel it's reasonable for me to mention it. You can get it on Audible. It's an audio book. I think it sells for like 30-something bucks, maybe less. And Mike, to your question also, I'm writing a book by the name of this training called Negotiating Recession. Watch for it in a few months. I'm developing it as we speak. And lastly, I warmly invite you to contact me if you have questions beyond what we discussed today. It's sf14@nyu.edu. I'd love to be there for you. So thank you. I'm rooting for you all the way. As you know, I'm Professor Seth Freeman. You can call me Seth. And I want to give special thanks to Mary Ellen and All Angels COVID-19 response team. They've been lovely. And so I welcome your questions.
Thank you.
I have one other question for you, Seth.
Yeah, please, Mike.
And this is not content related, but someone else in the field. There used to be this guy that advertised in airline magazines.
Yes.
Karas.
Karas, yes.
Yes. What was do you have a take on his school of approach?
No, I know absolutely nothing about him.
He's kind of fallen off the earth.
Apparently he's kind of a thing. He was kind of a big thing.
He was a big thing for a while. You couldn't take a flight somewhere.
No, no. The moment you mention him, I think airline.
Yeah, airline. On every airline, their in-flight magazine always had the 2-page ad for Karas negotiating.
Absolutely. And I must tell you, in teaching this for decades, I've never heard his name mentioned.
That's kind of what I was curious about, because
academics are goes, that doesn't mean anything. We academics can think we're all that, and we may be way, way off.
Yeah, but you know the literature and all that. You've never come across him, so that's...
No, but he could be great. Jerry Spence once said that nothing he learned in law school was at all useful for him as a trial lawyer.
That's true. I've heard that, yes.
That may be a bit of hyperbole, but so I approach him with humility and total ignorance. To your question, Tom.
I wanted to say, this whole negotiating technique reminds me of motivational interviewing, when you kind of connect with somebody as opposed to battle.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my.
You've been learning about motivational interviewing. You are spot on, sir. Spot on. How am I going to...
It sounds just like it while you was talking. I mean, it's the same concept.
You don't know. Motivational interviewing is basically a form of a humble inquiry. Or to put it another way, you ask a question and you listen. And then you ask a follow-up question, and then you listen, and you're nudging through the questions the person to start thinking about what you're interested in changing, what the behavior you're thinking of in changing. And this is way more effective than many other forms of persuasion. By the way, there's a fascinating study of what works for salespeople. This is a bonus sidebar. Basically, it's the same thing. It's called spin selling. It's the most well-researched form of selling there is. And basically, all it is asking a good question, listen, ask a follow-up question, listen. It's the exact opposite of Alec Baldwin and Glengarry Glen Ross going, always, he's closing. Not even close.
Thomas, really great. I have to go. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really learned a lot, too.
My great pleasure. Lana.
Yeah, I had a question. Speaking of ranges, Mary Ellen brought up when you're negotiating, but one party doesn't realize you are. And then we're talking also about, when both parties are coming to the table recognizing that you're negotiating.
Mhm.
What about pivoting something that doesn't start out as a negotiation but needs it to move to the next level? And my specific example would be doing volunteer work for, let's say, a year, where it begins as exploratory and very low commitment for both parties, but then at some point there needs to be some kind of tangible value for that relationship to continue.
Absolutely. I once spoke with a young man who told me that for the previous 18 months, he had been, in effect, volunteering for a profit-making startup. And every time he went to the founder, a very savvy and successful woman who was making a lot of money on this startup, saying, I'd like to see if we can convert this to a paying full-time job. She'd go, really not the right time. We really need you. We need you. Like this was like wartime and he was one of the RAF pilots. But no, not the right time. And this went on for 18 months and he said, what should I do? I said, you should quit yesterday. Because clearly they were stringing him along and that was inappropriate. There is a case to be made, especially in downtimes, to just go work for someone you'd love to work for free if you have to, in the hopes that that will turn into something. You can work on a project basis for a limited basis, but how do you transition? At going in, ideally, you agree, we'll do this for a certain amount of time or until a certain result has happened, and then we'll have a conversation. It is a little harder if it's just open-ended, because it's a little bit like, dating and getting married. That transition can be sensitive. But you still can have it. And I don't have, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but I think what you'd want to do, first you want to prepare. And I would definitely recommend role playing and thinking through some of this very conversation. If you'd like to have a taste of this a little more fully, I believe if you Google it, you'll find an article that's still up on Huffington Post for me called Winning Warmly, How Women Can and Do Lean In with Interest-Based Negotiating. And there it talks about not how to transition from nothing to something, but how women especially can negotiate for more money. And it's written with the awareness that the research is clear that, women don't ask, in part because of rank gender bias. There is some of that, but also because they pay a social cost that men don't pay for asking. So there's a certain double reticence. So what to do? Well, in the article, I walk through a couple of ideas. One is take an interest-based approach, take an evidence-based approach, but also practice something I call, that in the literature, it's called reframing. And this is where you ask for something in a way that's face-saving and winsome. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm asking you to become Scarlett O'Hara and flutter your eyelids, because men need to know how to do this every bit as much as women. But the article actually goes into a little more detail about how to reframe. This is something that a Harvard professor named Hannah Riley Bowles especially recommends. And I'll give you an example. Instead of saying, this is unfair, you've had me doing this for 7 months and I have got to get a salary. Yeah, that might work, but probably not. Another might be to say, I've really enjoyed building the relationship and learning about the organization, and it's been very stimulating. And I had a chat with Bob and Steve recently, and they were suggesting that this might be the right time for us to have a conversation about continuing the relationship and what might be reasonable compensation. And I'm not wed to a specific number, as long as we come up with something that we both find is fair. And I've done a little research to make sure I've done that. Would this be a good time to have a conversation sometime this week about that? And now what you've done is you've found a face-saving way to raise the matter. You've signaled positivity. You signaled constructiveness, flexibility, and you are gently signaling it is time for us to talk about a wedding. Does that start to answer your good question, Lana?
Yeah, very helpful. Thanks, Seth.
You're most welcome. Others?